Hi, my name's Keith Cooper, and in this video I'm going to be looking at how to get more punch out of your colour prints. More to the point, it's an attempt to try and make prints look a bit more like screen. Now, if you've seen many of my other printing videos, you know I say that you can never get prints to look like a screen. However, there are some things you can do after you've done your editing that will potentially, for some images, make a difference and give you an image that looks better on print, and perhaps give some of the impression you were after that you'd got on screen. Now, up front, you can never match screen and print because one's got light coming out of it, it's emitting light here, one's reflected light from the various lights around here. But you can give the impression of a better looking print. And the key takeaway from this should be that the best looking image on the screen does not necessarily equate with the best looking print. And that sometimes by making the image on the screen look worse, you can actually make a better looking print. If you have a print workflow, then that shouldn't be a problem really, because you're not actually aiming to produce a screen image for people to look at. If you were doing this for web use and for print use, you might well process your images in two different streams. You might produce one image which looked best for the web with a relatively limited color space, and one for print which was optimized for print. And certainly if you were doing this commercially, you would edit the image, you would produce it so that it looked best for the chosen print medium. Now I'm going to show some differences of paper as well, and printers and things like that. So I'm going to cover quite a lot here at a level. It's not a step-by-step guide, it's showing the principles that you can apply. Now I'm using Photoshop. I've done the editing on another Mac. I'm just showing some screenshots here rather than a step-by-step guide. If you've got any questions, please do ask on the notes for the video. But anyway, let's kick off with the particular image. And this is a food shot, and the picture, it is of a rather tasty snack that I had in a small cafe that's just down the road from where I live. You can see there's a fried egg on it, there's spinach, there's a salad with it, there's all kinds of some really nice looking pastry. So the image itself was taken quite a few years ago and was actually taken using a Canon 60D. When I had one for testing for years. This is long before I did videos and things. So I've got my 60D testing stuff on the Northlight Images site if you're ever curious to see it. But this is an image I took of my lunch at this place. I'd been out testing the camera and I stopped off and I got a picture of this particular shot here. It is lit entirely by natural lighting. I'm sitting in front of a big window. It was a grey, slightly rainy day, so it had a very smooth, soft light. You've got the reflection in the picture here. Now, have I processed it? I'm going to assume, I'm not going to cover a great deal on processing here, because I'm going to assume that you've processed your image to a point where you think you've got a nice looking image that you want to print. What have I done? I've opened the raw file. I've white balanced it to make sure that the white of the egg is properly white. I'm happy with the color balance, that I've got a good range of colors. I've got a picture that looks okay. That's basic raw image processing, and I've got this image and I now want to print it. Now, the steps up to getting a great picture here are not necessarily that dependent on what I'm going to do with the picture that I'm going to print it. So I'm printing it here on the Epson P5000. That's a fairly high quality pigment ink printer with lots of inks. It's got like an orange ink, green ink, so it has a very good color gamut. So I'm printing this image and the basic print of the image. Now, before I do anything but that, am I happy with the detail at this print size? Well, I've resized it slightly and so on, but the main thing is that I'm going to sharpen it, and I'm going to use Sharpen AI in this instance because this was a handheld shot. There is, when I looked at the very fine details, I can see there's a tiny few pixels worth of camera shake on some of the highlights, and running the sharpening on it, I could use ordinary sharpening as well. It wouldn't make that much difference. Just happens to be a tool I use quite often. So I've got a picture here that I've sharpened a little bit, and the detail, I can see it. There's a tiny, these are tiny shavings of bacon on the egg, just to give a bit of flavour there. And in sharpening using Sharpen AI, I've ended up getting just little highlights on the details here, the reflections. It also brings out the texture of the bread. The lens I used, if I remember rightly, was 50mm f1. It was the Canon f1.4 50mm lens. So I've got slightly out of focus background on the print, but I've sharpened it for basic printing here. Now this, I don't need any more sharpening on this. I'm really only interested in how sharp the in-focus elements of the picture are. This will vary by every picture. It's one reason I can't give step-by-step guides how to do this stuff. You have to look at the printer, at the picture, decide what you want to show, decide what you want to emphasize in it, and your editing is guided by that. Your editing should almost never be guided by a menu, a list that you follow. I do A, I do B, I do C. Yeah, that may work, but it's never ever going to give you optimal results. Look at the picture, look at how the different aspects of the picture might need sharpening and things. But anyway, this is just basic sharpening here. And it just, at this level, it just brings out the highlights, the reflections on the bread and on the egg there, just a little bit better. So I've got that. I've done some sharpening. I've also done a bit of noise reduction. The Canon 60D, by now it's an oldish camera. The images, particularly in relatively low light here, I might have put the ISO up a bit. It was a little bit noisy. The processing has removed some of the noise. I don't want to remove all the noise because that can make an image look, just when it comes out as a print, just a little bit too painterly looking. A bit of noise doesn't cause any harm. And at this size of picture, you'd need to look at it very, very closely, certainly closer than I can with these particular glasses on, to actually see any noise. But I've just reduced it a little bit, so I've got myself a picture there that I'm happy with, and that's what I've gone and printed. Now, how do I check the print first? Now, this is just a straight off print. And after I've done that, I've decided to have a look at soft proofing. This is the base level print. What am I using soft proofing for here? I am not using it the standard way an awful lot of people do, almost habitually use soft proofing. Oh, I'll just flick on soft proofing, see what the print's going to look like. Oh, there we go, and that's it. Rarely works unless you set up soft proofing quite carefully in general. It is a crutch that too many people lean on, and it is not as effective as you hope it's going to be. Understanding prints is far more important. Now, why am I using soft proofing in this instance? Well, I want to see whether I can make adjustments to this picture that may not look great on the screen, but will improve the print. Remember I said that the best image on screen is not necessarily the same as the best image on the print. So I'm going to crank up the colour. Now, it sounds easy, I'll just up the colour and it'll be okay. Well, not so fast. I'm printing this image. Now, I've saved the image when I processed the raw file into Pro Photo, which is a big colour space. It's a colour space that I can't even show on a good monitor like this. It won't show. Doesn't really matter because in real world images, most of the colours are going to be within the range that could be shown here and printed. But there are subtle differences. Each paper printer has slightly different range. So I'm going to use soft proofing, but I'm going to turn on, in a moment, I'm going to turn on the gamut warning as well, which will show me when the colours in the image are beyond the edge of the gamut, the range of colours that the printer can manage. Now, the easy way to think of this is, oh, well, all right, I'll just make sure they're all within gamut and I'll be fine. And I won't have any, images that go out of gamut. Well, and I'm using Photoshop here for this. The Photoshop gamut warning tool is an all or nothing thing. it gives you a clear warning when something goes out of gamut. So in other words, colours that won't be printed quite the way you want them. Notice I don't say colours that will be printed wrongly, because it isn't that. The gamut warning itself, and I've got several different settings I apply here, will tell me when the colours just touch on the out of gamut. Now when I print, those out of gamut colours are handled by the printer profile, the printer driver, and the print system. So I will get an output, I just won't get quite the output I was expecting. Now remember, what you see on the screen is not the same as here, so I'm relying on a screen simulation of what I'm going to see. Now if you put on the proofing conditions in Photoshop, you get choices. You can pick your rendering intent, and sometimes images will look better just by switching to a different rendering intent. So you've got typically perceptual, saturation, relative colorimetric. Now most images I tend to print relative colorimetric. Sometimes for stronger coloured images I will print them, I will have a look at printing them with the saturation rendering intent. That tries to maintain saturated colours. The problem is really there's not necessarily that much difference, and you may want, and certainly not enough difference that you think it worthwhile doing. Always worth looking at rendering intents. When you're looking at your soft proofing, by the way, in this I've got two options. I've got the option to simulate paper colour and option to simulate black ink. I don't bother with the simulate paper colour because it just adds a colour cast to the image here, and with the rest of the screen it just doesn't work properly. Now there are ways of getting around this, but in general I don't bother with the simulate paper colour for ordinary papers. The simulate black ink will reduce the contrast, and it won't give you the deep blacks that you see on a screen that you see on a screen but don't get on a print. So I've just got my soft proofing set here. I've picked a profile for this printer, this paper, and here, and I've got it, and it is the one here, this particular paper is Epson Premium Luster, so I'm using one of Epson's profiles here. Now if I used one of my profiles, would I get better results? Maybe, maybe not. I might get slightly different results. Once again, maybe not enough to notice, because the Epson profiles in this instance for this printer are pretty good, so I've not got a problem with that. Now if I put on the gamut warning here, these red blotches show out of gamut areas. You think, oh, that looks rather bad. Actually what I should say is this is when I've applied a saturation vibrance adjustment layer, and I've cranked the image vibrance up to full. And it's pushed some areas of the image, particularly the yellows here, some of these reds, and some of the deep greens, it's pushed them way out of gamut. I don't really want that. So what I'm actually going to use is a far more subtle amount of vibrance adjustment, and I'm just going to give a 25% or 25 on the settings vibrance adjustment here for this, and I've cranked that up. So that's that picture as was. There is, and if you can see a difference, I'll be surprised. Under good lighting, I can see a slight difference. The colours just have a little bit more oomph in this picture. On the screen, they look just a little bit richer. So this is the print as is. This is the print with the vibrance shoved up by 25 points. Yeah, it does look better. It's a better looking print, and it has a bit more of a feel for the, for the texture and everything. Now, texture. This image has a lot of implied texture in it, whether it's the crispiness of the bread that I've broken here, or it's the vegetables, or even the bacon chips on the egg. Lots of it's out of focus, but there are sharp bits as well. Reflections off the bread, point specular reflections off it. They should be absolute white, by the way. And I don't really want to reduce the contrast level any more than necessary here on the print. So here I have a print, and it's printed as I would on an A3 plus sheet. It's on roll paper, so hence the big margin on the top, where I can write some notes to remind me, because they really are not that different. So I've got this is it printed with the vibrance shoved up. Does it look better? Yeah, it does look a little better, but not a great deal better. What next can I do to the image just to give it a bit more punch? Remember that on a screen you've got quite a wide dynamic range. You've got quite a high contrast. You don't have that contrast on a print. So what do I need to do? I need to bump up the contrast, but I can't because it's a print. What I can use is local contrast enhancement or structure, and I'm using my old friend Nick Sharpener Pro 3. Now I'm doing no print sharpening. I've turned the output sharpening, i.e. the detail sharpening, off completely for this because the image is sharp enough as it is anyway. But what I have increased is I've increased the structure and local contrast settings. And what that does is just give me an image which it opens up some of the shadows ever so slightly, but in a way that gives more depth and contrast. So here it is, I've got an image. Now this one compared to the original, I can definitely see it feels more real. You know, the classic test of any picture like this is, does it make you feel hungry? And this one does. It reminds me of how nice this particular food was. That egg really was beautiful. Really nice bit of food there. And it has a bit more. Now, if I put it next to this one, can I see obvious differences? No, I can't see obvious differences, but this one looks better. So here we go. What have I done here for this one? This is where I have to look at the notes I've added because I do add various things. Here's another adjustment. I've added structure and local contrast. But I've gone back to my gamut warning with the particular profile here. I've gone back to that, and I've this time, as well as the previous Vibrance, I've added a new adjustment layer, and this is a hue saturation adjustment layer, and I've gone to the yellows, and I've increased the saturation of the yellows by +5. Why +5? Well, once again, this particular image here, I've got the gamut warning turned on. I'm looking at the soft proof version of the picture here, and with the adjustment here I've increased the saturation of the yellows a bit. If I push it up to more, you will get out of gamma errors all over the place, and it will lose some of the texture of the egg yolk if you push it too far. We're getting up to almost as good as this particular paper on this particular printer can manage. There are all kinds of ways you can tweak these things, and I would suggest you do it yourself. If try these adjustments, try prints. You don't have to make big prints like this. You can make just small test prints just to see the effect of different brightly coloured parts of an image. Brightly coloured flowers or something to try and get a print of, just to get the depth of colour that you want. Once again, local contrast helps. So brightly coloured flowers against the dark background, for example. So there we go, we've got that picture. What more can I do? Well, how about a different paper? Sometimes a different paper will help. Now the paper I've got here is this particular one, which I've tested this before, and I know that this works really well. It's Permajet, it's a UK glossy. It's a metallic paper, Permajet Titanium Gloss 300. Now I've got lots of examples I've used of this in the past, but I know that this one works well for strongly coloured images. So here I have a picture printed on the P5000 there. And now that just has a little bit more depth. Now I know depth is a meaningless term and quite tricky to get the hang of. You know, it means different things to everybody who ever use it. But the colours, they have a more luminous look to them. Well, it's partly because of the paper. The gamut of this paper is actually slightly less than this one here. But the way it looks for the right contrasty image, I did something on metallic, some Red River metallic papers recently, but how it looks with this is subtly different. So that this image, this one's good, but this one, the dark areas look a bit better. The colour, it's the light coming out, and this one will be very dependent on the lighting. So it's not obviously metallic, but this is the one that really looks good. So there we go. is there anything else I can try to get a better looking print? Well, you may have noticed, I mentioned I was printing here on the P5000. I have here Canon Pro 200 dye-based printer. Now, the classic received wisdom is that dye-based printers are just not quite as good as pigment ink. Certainly, prints on this won't be archival to the same extent, and there are different, but you know, there are other things. It's easier to get black and white, certainly on the P5000, than it is on this. But I happen to know that with this printer and the metallic paper, that if I really want a great looking print, I'll print on this dye-based printer. With this metallic paper and the dye-based prints, I've got an image that in some ways has even more punch to it than the one on the screen. Now, it can be quite tricky finding images, and you need to edit images for the paper that works with this. One other little trick, you'll notice this is printed borderless. When you print a white border, or don't print, so there is a white border on an image, the white reduces the perceived contrast. By printing borderless, you're now seeing this against a darker background, and we don't get the contrast damping effect of the white border. So if you want a picture like this, if you want to frame a picture like this, use a dark matte. Don't use a white matte. Use a dark matte on it, and it will make the picture itself look brighter. Now this is looking bright enough. There's no gloss differential on it, which you get with the pigment inks. And this one is looking almost like a transparency to me here. Now, there's the image there with all the adjustments on it. And there's the print. So it turns out the best looking print, well, I'm going to say it's actually the one off the Pro 200. Which is another reason I wonder sometimes why Epson and Canon do not produce pro-level dye-base ink options for their printers, because there is a type of print that really do look well on that. So there you have it. Assorted prints, assorted printers, and tweaking of an image to get it right. Now, every image is different. You need to consider what the gamut warnings really mean. You need to have good profiles. You need to have good lighting. You need to have your monitor accurately set up, calibrated, etc., etc. All the stuff. It's about the whole workflow. Up to a point, it's normal editing for your picture from your raw file, so processing it as you would doing editing. But once you want to get the best from a print, you really do have to start thinking of the print that you're making. The print that you are making is not the same as the screen. So this image here on the screen, or the outer, is actually a bit over the top for my liking. It just looks a bit strong. As a print, well, looks fairly good. As I say, if you've got any questions, please do ask. Hope this is of use. Let me know. Please do subscribe to the channel, much appreciated. And if you get a chance, pass this channel ID on to other people, because I've found quite a few people like the stuff. So thanks very much for watching.